Hi, welcome to another episode of Swarajya Standpoint. It seems the farmer protests are going on and on. The deadlock seems impossible to resolve. Now, more than 2 months ago, I did a video which discussed the role of private sector in India's agricultural future. It discussed few of the companies, the work they had been doing, the quality of the work, the importance of the work, the overall significance in the value chain. And this was before the protests began. This was way before the protests began at the Singhu border. I discussed that in a very elaborate manner. I'll put the link in the description. But let's come back to the present. At Singhu border, the protests have been on. Now, the protests started because someone thought that the APMCs were being demolished, that the APMC structure, which has ensured the procurement of the produce, was going to be demolished. So the state was going to lose out on a lot of revenue. That was the first thought. The government came forward. They clarified that the MSP is not going anywhere. The APMC is not going anywhere. Yet, the farmers thought that the MSP is going to go. The government came forward again. They assured that the MSP is not going anywhere. In fact, the MSP procurement from Punjab this year has been way higher as compared to last year for wheat and paddy. So after every myth was debunked, the farmers came up with a unique reason to protest: their contempt, their hate for the private sector, specifically for Adani and Ambani, because they took to seek inspiration from the Rahul Gandhi jibe, who thinks that everything that Modi does is for Adani and Ambani. So the farmers also went on the same pedestal that, oh, the farming sector is being given to Adani and Ambani. Now, first things first, MSP is for 6% of the farmers in India. In 2019-22, of the 40 lakh crore agricultural produce, around 2.5 lakh crore produce was procured under the MSP regime. 6% farmers benefit from the MSP regime, largely in Punjab. In Punjab, the entire agricultural economy has been tied to wheat and paddy, which has grown on almost 75% of the cultivated land, the other crops being cotton and some other vegetables and things like that. Since 1960, since the Green Revolution, the cultivation of wheat and paddy has only increased in Punjab. The procurement has only increased in Punjab. So for Punjab, anything other than MSP is unthinkable. They haven't ever seen a future, a perspective of the agricultural sector without MSP, without wheat and paddy. Now, the new farm reforms, they do not undo any of the system. They do not cancel out any of the system. But even then, the Punjab farmers are protesting and people are protesting with them against the private sector. Now, they are being backed by Instagram influencers who had no idea about CAA. Remember the CAA protest, which was just before the COVID lockdown, and how you came across posts on Instagram where people were trying to tell you that Muslims are going to lose citizenship because of the CAA. And none of that happened. I call it the Farhan law of protest, that everyone is protesting, so we must protest as well. I call it the Diljit Dosanjh law of deduction also, that if a Punjabi is saying it's wrong, it must be wrong. But that's not how the real world works. The travesty, the greatest tragedy of these protests is that everything has been boiled down to MSP. The participation of the private sector, the government's role, everything has been revolved around one single aspect, which is the MSP. Now, that is far from truth, because MSP is just a part of the entire agricultural value chain. It's just a part. Of course, it's a very important part. The price the farmers are getting for their produce is very, very important. But that is not all that farming is all about. What is the role of private sector in the entire value chain, if we were to talk about it in this way? Now, before I dig into that, there's one thought that has been lingering on in my mind for a very long time now. That if all these protesters, from Instagram to Singhu border to Canada to Australia to the United Kingdom, all these people who are backing these protesters, if they were asked to leave their private sector jobs, if they were asked to never again enjoy the innovations of the private sector, the protest would be closed by tomorrow morning. They would be over by tomorrow morning. The other hypocrisy which has come out from the ground is that some journalists are saluting the entrepreneurial nature of the farmers when it comes to pizzas, when it comes to gyms, when it comes to having massage parlors. Fair and good. Okay, they want to have pizzas at the protest site, even though they claim that there's a relay hunger strike going on, or whatever. Good enough. But how can you support the entrepreneurial nature of the farmers at one hand and dismiss the private sector on the other hand? If I look down, there are some companies that must be discussed who are doing some tremendous work when it comes to agriculture in India. Now, I'll tell you why is this important. For one thing, that 86% of the farmers in India who are cultivating on almost 47% of the cropland, these are 86% of India's farmers. 86%, it's a huge number. They cultivate 47% of the cropland and their land holdings on an average are less than 2 hectares. If I go for another 44% of the cropland, if I talk about another 44% of the cropland, that's with the medium and semi-medium farmers. Now, all these farmers cannot afford the technology. They cannot afford the futuristic investments. They cannot afford machine learning solutions. They cannot afford 5G solutions. They cannot afford things which are now becoming critical to China's agriculture or perhaps US's agriculture. So this is where the private sector becomes important. Take the example of Punjab farmers. Every year we see stubble burning happening. What do the Punjab farmers say? Even though their annual agricultural income is the highest in India, for Punjab it's the highest in India, even though they see the maximum benefits of MSP procurement coming to them. What do the farmers of Punjab say every year we have the smog in NCR? They simply say that they do not have the money to invest in technology solutions that can disable the burning of stubble, that can ensure that the stubble doesn't need to be burned, it can be put to some other use. They always say they do not have money, and these are rich farmers of Punjab, very well documented, very well made rich by the MSP. Think about the other 86% farmers who are cultivating on land less than 2 hectares. Where will they get their technology investments from? And this is where the private sector becomes important. It becomes important when it comes to creating a digital marketplace for farm inputs because it helps with the transparency in prices. It becomes important with the research on plant and animal life sciences. It becomes important when you talk about farm equipment on a rental basis, not just buying on a rental basis. It becomes important when we talk about geospatial data, IoT, sensors, robotics. The climate is changing, and for a farmer who cultivates on a land holding less than 2 hectares, the difference between a good crop and a wiped out crop is just one unpredictable, unprecedented, untimely rainfall. And this is where such data analytical solutions become important. Now, the government has a limited capacity of what it can offer to the farmer of India. It offers the MSP, it offers the subsidy, it offers certain direct benefit transfers. But for the government of India to give that technology assistance at the grassroots level, at the ground root level to every farmer, that's difficult. This is where private sector becomes important. And there are a lot of companies. If I talk about Crop and Bharat Agri, they are addressing the challenges of precision agriculture and farm management. D-Heart and Big Heart are aiding farmers with better returns by creating a digital platform for farm inputs. Intello Labs and AgriCX are working in the domain of crop quality management. Then there is also Source Trans and Front Allrain that are critical players in how the produce is transported from the farms to the sellers. These are some examples. There was one interesting company I came across by the name of Tartan Sense. Now we have the issue of pesticides in Punjab. I'm giving you an example. We have the issue of overuse of pesticides in Punjab that has led to cancer villages, that has led to a number of problems. What is what is Tartan Sense doing? It's actually creating a drone. It's actually creating a robot rather, not a drone, which can actually detect which plant, which particular leaf needs the pesticide treatment and offer it to that. It's not about spraying all your fields with pesticides needlessly. So these solutions, these tech solutions, they are catering to the ground root level, something the government cannot do as of now, given the lack of resources, the lack of research, however you want to put it. But the private sector is in a better position to do so. Now let's talk about the employment aspect of private sector. What have we learned from the private sector experiment in other parts? Think about this. If in early 2000s there was not an IT boom in India, where would the employment be absorbed? In IT boom, I'm just giving an example. The software as a service, the call centers, your BPOs, KPOs, they absorbed a large amount of young workforce. Even today, they continue to do so. Now, imagine if there were no private universities for students to take admissions in. Not everyone can get through NITs, IIMs, IITs, and other government institutions. People needed private sector solutions. Private universities came up, and now every region has some significant private universities. Everywhere we see the fruits of private sector innovation, so why not in agriculture? The other aspect, which was very ironical, if I talk about Punjab's farmers, is about the labor also. Now, the most new generation people in Punjab, they're not very inclined to farming. Instead, they have their labor coming in from UP and Bihar, works for them on the farms, well and good, and they take care of the large land holdings. Why are we not looking beyond the farmer as a farmer? Now, we know that more than 40% of India's population is directly or indirectly engaged in agriculture. Why don't we look beyond farmers? Why don't we look at agripreneurs? Why can't we see them as entrepreneurs, Atmanirbhar in their own sense? They can willingly decide who to sell to, who to cultivate for, what to cultivate, when to cultivate. Why can't we look at that? And these are solutions that will come from the private sector. And this was what the government wanted to do with the three farm laws. Now, the entire thing has been boiled down to Ambani and Adani. In fact, the railways, some fact checker had to in fact put out a tweet saying that the railways has not been sold to Adani. It was very sad for such clarifications to be made on social media, but I marvel the people who needed that clarification. We can also not dismiss the role of Jio in the farming sector of India in the future. Remember when Jio platforms was launched, it was in the middle of the lockdown, and we discussed in one of the videos, I'll also put that link in the description, that Jio is going to be very instrumental for the farmers in the sense that Jio has the penetration the likes of Big Basket and Grofers does not have right now. They can cater to 200, 300 cities right away, nearby villages, and help people buy directly from the farmers, eliminating the middleman where the farmer wants to eliminate it. Again, it's an option. The farmer can choose to go through the middleman in the APMC mandis or rather sell it directly. Now, people want to look at Jio with great skepticism. That's okay. In fact, a lot of Instagram influencers who are actually prominent actors in YouTube web series which have grown in prominence in India, in importance in India because of the internet accessibility made possible by Jio. That's the whole irony. They were against Jio getting into the farming sector, which is, of course, doesn't make any sense. But to dismiss private sector with such contempt for the farmers, it's sheer hypocrisy because these are the same people in Canada, in Australia, or even on Instagram who have made good fortunes through the private sector. People go to Canada, they do use private consultants, go and work for private companies there. So why is it so bad if the farmer of Punjab and if the farmer of India wants to work with the private sector? Have we not seen that beyond the 22 crops under MSP, there are farmers working with big corporates in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, there are FPOs. So there are a lot of successful case studies as well. And if the private sector is just being offered as an option, it's not being offered as a law. It's not being said that the farmer can only work with the private sector. It's being said that the farmer can work with the private sector if he so wishes to. So why is it so bad? One cannot help but really think that these are some vested interests, the likes of Yogendra Yadav, who want to keep the farmer poor. There are some political parties who want to keep the farmer poor by virtue of giving them free subsidies, credit waivers, and things like that. These people want the farmer to remain poor so that he remains dependent on them. And he continues to be the vote bank that they want him to be by virtue of free subsidies and credit waivers and so on. But this cannot go on forever. If I talk about Punjab alone, the groundwater levels are not going to be enough to sustain the cultivation of wheat and paddy 5 to 10 years from now. And then it won't matter if it's the Akalis, if it's the Congress, if it's the Aam Aadmi Party, because the farmers won't be able to make any good use of the lands. And what good will a vote bank like that be? This is something the political parties need to introspect. But for the farmers, the private sector can open up employment, tech, and other innovations that are unthinkable right now with MSP. And it would be only unfortunate if the farmers choose to attach their future to just one aspect of the entire value chain in agriculture, that is the MSP. Thank you.